Picture this. You haven't eaten in 2 days. You know exactly where the herd is. You tracked it yesterday, you found the prints, you've mapped the route perfectly in your head, and now all you have to do is get there. And then it starts raining. We're not talking about a light drizzle here. We're talking about a heavy, soaking, wind-driven rain that simply does not stop. It goes all day, then all night. Then the next morning, it is still going. Well, now you can't hunt. You can't see any tracks because the mud has washed them completely away. You definitely can't move through the open because wet ground and bare feet on rocky terrain means a twisted ankle. And let me tell you, a twisted ankle out here, that's a death sentence. The river near your camp is rising fast, and your fire is starting to struggle. You aren't just bored, you are trapped. For most of human history, rain wasn't just some minor inconvenience. It was a full-blown crisis. Okay, let's dive into this explainer, the prehistoric pressure cooker, surviving the storm, and see how surviving this ancient trap actually forged human history.
You know how it is today. When it rains, you close your window, make a cup of coffee, maybe grab a blanket, and fire up Netflix. You get cozy on the couch, start wiggling into that perfect spot, and just sink right in. For us, rain is just nice background noise, right? It makes you feel calm, maybe a little sleepy. You might not even make it through a single episode. But for a human being 50,000 years ago, that exact same rain, the very sound you're falling asleep to, dropped them straight into a visceral survival thriller. The storm could literally kill you in 3 different ways before it even broke. It absolutely wasn't about getting cozy. It was about sheer high-stakes survival.
So what was the first immediate threat? The cold, and it is absolutely terrifying. A wet human loses body heat up to 25 times faster than a dry one. 25 times! Without waterproof clothing or a completely sealed shelter, a long rainstorm and anything below about 50 degrees Fahrenheit could plunge your core temperature straight into the hypothermia zone within a matter of hours. And remember, most of the world our ancestors lived in got that cold at night, even in Africa during the wet season at higher elevations. The rain basically turned the very air around them into a deadly, freezing enemy.
So early humans were battling a terrifying trifecta. We've just talked about hypothermia, but the second killer crashing the grid was flash floods. Think about it. The main places humans lived were often caves and rock shelters at the base of hillsides or right near rivers. Heavy rain meant violent, sudden flash floods. Archaeologists have actually dug up thick layers of flood sediment inside occupied caves, which means the water came rushing in while people were literally living there. And a lot of those layers, they show that the caves were abandoned and never used again. But then there's the third killer on our list, and honestly, this one might just be the most terrifying of all: apex predators.
Just wrap your head around this chilling fact for a second. The rain drove enormous, deadly animals into shelter too. And sometimes the shelter they chose was the exact same cave our ancestors were already hiding in. There are actual cave sites in South Africa where human remains and large cat remains are found in the exact same sediment layers. Some of those human skulls have puncture marks that perfectly match leopard teeth. Rain didn't just make life uncomfortable, it compressed the entire world. Humans, predators, prey, everyone was squeezed into the same small, dry spaces at the exact same time, turning the cave into a deadly, high-stakes pressure cooker.
Section 1. The hustle for heat. Protecting the biological lighter. In the middle of this compressed, terrifying lockdown, one job mattered more than absolutely anything else: keeping the fire going. This was the ultimate life-or-death grind of the ancient world. See, before roughly 40,000 years ago, we aren't entirely sure how reliably humans could start a fire completely from scratch. Controlling a fire that already exists and creating one from nothing, those are 2 entirely different skills. For most of human history, if your fire went out, you probably couldn't relight it. Maintaining the flame was your squad's only hope for warmth, light, and protection against those apex predators lurking in the dark. Because losing a fire was basically a death sentence, early humans got incredibly resourceful. They literally carried their fire with them. They used something called tinder fungus, a woody mushroom that acted as a biological lighter. You could pack it with smoldering coals, and it would catch a spark and safely smolder inside itself for hours. And we know this wasn't just guesswork. When archaeologists found Otzi the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old frozen man in the Alps, he had a complete fire kit right in his belt pouch, including tinder fungus, flint, and iron pyrite. Protecting this heat source was an absolute ancient obsession.
So when the rain hit, your first priority wasn't even the shelter itself. It was executing a very specific set of steps to save the flame. You had to move it deeper into the cave, shield it with animal hides, and carefully split open wet logs just to get at the tiny bit of dry wood inside. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is step number 4, burning birch bark. Birch bark contains a specific chemical called butylene that actually allows it to catch fire and burn even when it is soaking wet.
One person's entire job during a rainstorm would be sitting next to that fire for hours, feeding it, shielding it, completely focused on keeping it alive. Letting it go out was simply not an option.
Moving on to Section 2, the prehistoric cave factory. From panic to productivity.
Okay, so the fire's going, you're mostly dry, and you're avoiding the leopards. Now what do? Well, you get on the grind. The archaeological record absolutely proves that these terrifying lockdowns forced early humans to turn their shelters into active, bustling manufacturing hubs. Caves and rock shelters from this era are completely packed with evidence of mass production. We find massive piles of flaking debris, the tiny rock chips that fly off when you're shaping stone tools, concentrated in very specific spots inside the caves, exactly where someone would sit near the firelight and work for hours on end. Just look at this timeline of insane prehistoric tech drops that happened while they were waiting out the rain. At Blombos Cave, we found a 100,000-year-old ochre processing workshop, complete with abalone shell mixing bowls. At Sabudu Cave, from 77,000 years ago, they didn't just survive. They manufactured pest control bedding using Cape laurel leaves to repel insects. Then we see delicate, incredibly precise bone needles showing up 61,000 years ago. And 52,000 years ago at Abré du Maras in France, the oldest direct evidence of twisted plant fiber string. I mean, you don't make delicate bone needles or string while you're running from a predator. You make them when you're sitting still, perfectly focused, with hours of rainy downtime to spare. Rainy days were purely for vital protection.
And that brings us to an absolutely mind-blowing discovery from Holy Fels Cave in Germany. A 35,000-year-old tool carved straight out of mammoth ivory, featuring 4 holes and spiral grooves. Guys, it is literally a prehistoric rope-making machine. Making rope is a slow, highly repetitive process that requires immense patience. It is the absolute perfect bad weather grind. And think about how much rope changed the game. It let them build better shelters, create snares, and tightly bind tools to handles. An incredible amount of ancient human technology runs entirely on string, and it was almost certainly perfected by someone stuck inside just waiting for the rain to stop.
Section 3, the underground renaissance, creating in the pitch black.
The claustrophobic energy of being stuck inside pushed our ancestors to do something entirely unexpected. Once every tool was sharpened and every rope was twisted, they took their fire and ventured deep into the terrifying pitch-black depths of their cave systems. They moved far away from the safety of the entrance, crawling through incredibly narrow passages. And this brilliantly illustrates what they achieved in that darkness. The Chauvet Cave in France contains absolute masterpieces from roughly 36,000 years ago. We're talking hyper-accurate drawings of lions, horses, and rhinos. The artists understood anatomy, movement, and perspective perfectly. Some animals are drawn mid-stride with their muscles visibly tensed. And remember, they definitely weren't looking at these animals while painting. They carried animal fat lamps into total darkness and recreated these massive beasts entirely from memory. Nobody does that when the weather is perfect and the hunting is good. The most profound creative explosion in prehistory happened specifically because they were trapped inside.
But this forced proximity during storms didn't just create amazing art, it likely birthed human culture itself. Check out this fascinating data from anthropologist Polly Weissner's study on the Kalahari Bushmen. During the day, their conversations were strictly practical. Land rights, resources, daily complaints. But look at the chart. At night, around the fire, over 80% of the conversation completely shifted to stories, songs, and ceremonies. The campfire softened faces, reduced tension, and created a space where people really opened up. Sitting around the fire while the rain hammered outside wasn't just about staying warm, it was humanity's original social network.
So rainy days were absolutely not dead time. They were transmission time. This was the critical window when vital survival data was actively uploaded into the group's collective memory. The stories they shared around the fire weren't just idle gossip, they were literal blueprints for survival. They shared where water sources dry up in the summer, which plants are actually safe to eat, where the best flint deposits are hiding, and exactly how to track specific predators. Knowledge moved seamlessly from the old to the young, reinforcing and updating the software of human survival through the sheer power of speech.
If you doubt the raw power of this fireside storytelling, consider this number: 7,000 years. The oldest known oral traditions that have been successfully verified against real geological events are Australian Aboriginal stories. These stories accurately describe sea level changes that happened roughly 7 millennia ago. That precious geological data survived for 7,000 years through nothing but people sitting together, sharing and retelling these stories over and over again. That kind of monumental cultural memory only develops when groups are forced to spend enormous amounts of downtime perfectly preserving their history.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds. The come-up, the post-storm payoff.
Because the truth is, the rain wasn't always just a miserable trap. For the groups that used their downtime to prepare, the end of the storm signaled an absolutely massive opportunity. When the skies finally cleared and they stepped out of the cave, equipped with their newly crafted tools, pristine ropes, and shared survival tactics, they walked into a completely transformed world. The wet world waiting outside offered a massive tactical advantage. Just look at this post-storm buffet. The heavy rain left soft mud, which meant deep, clear, perfect tracks. You could see exactly which animals walked past and exactly how fast they were moving. Rock depressions near campsites were suddenly completely full of clean, stored drinking water. Tubers were way easier to dig from the wet soil, and mushrooms practically exploded across the landscape. And then you have the insects, specifically termite swarms. Termites swarm right after a rain, and they're one of the most protein-dense, low-effort foods available anywhere. Even chimpanzees gorge on termite swarms after rainstorms today. Early humans stepped out of the cave right into an absolute feast.
So the core takeaway of this entire explainer is actually pretty simple. Rain didn't slow ancient humans down. It forced them to stop, think, and prepare for everything that came next. Every sharp tool, every piece of sewn clothing, every tightly wound rope, every myth passed down, and every stunning painting on a cave wall, all of it was born from downtime. Relentless prehistoric rainstorms forced human culture and technology to explode out of sheer necessity and prehistoric cabin fever.
See, boredom just didn't exist for our ancestors the way it does for us today. When you're trapped in a cave and your survival depends entirely on what you can make with your two hands before the storm breaks, you don't get bored, you get incredibly creative. Which leaves us with this final, kind of heavy thought to ponder. If prehistoric cabin fever and the raw struggle to survive a rainy day birthed the very foundations of human culture, art, and technology, is our cozy, Netflix-filled modern comfort quietly killing our greatest superpower? Think about that the next time you're stuck in